Vasishta's Yoga, Part 4 on Sustenance, the story of Dāśūra. Vasishta continued, O Rama, they who are busy with the diverse affairs in this world in pursuit of pleasure and power do not desire to know the truth, which they obviously do not see. He who is wise, but who has not completely controlled the pleasure seeking tendencies of his senses, sees the truth and sees the illusion. And he who has clearly understood the nature of the world and of the jiva, and who has firmly rejected the world appearance as the reality, he is liberated and is not born again. The ignorant strive for the welfare of the body and not of the self. Be not like the ignorant, but be wise. To illustrate this, I shall now narrate to you an interesting legend. In the country known as Magadha, which had an abundance of pleasure gardens, there lived a sage by name Dāśūra. He was engaged in breathtaking penance. He was a great ascetic who had no interest at all in worldly pleasures, and he was learned too. He was the son of another sage known as Sharaloma, but as ill luck would have it, he lost both his parents when he was young. The deities of the forest took pity on his orphan, who was inconsolable in his grief, and they said to him, O wise boy, you are the son of a sage. Why do you weep like an ignorant fool? Do you not know the evanescent nature of this world appearance? Young one, which is the very nature of this world appearance? Such is the very nature of this world appearance. Things come into being, they exist for a while, and they are then destroyed. Whatever being there appears to be from the relative point of view, even if that being is called Brahma, the creator, is subject to this inevitable end. There is no doubt about this. Hence, do not grieve over the inevitable death of your parents. The young man's sorrow was ameliorated. He got up and performed the funeral rites of his parents. Then he began to lead a rigorous religious life, hemmed in on all sides with the do's and don'ts. Since he had not yet realized the truth, he was immersed in the performance of the rituals, with all their injunctions and prohibitions. All this created in him a feeling that the whole world is full of impurities. He sought to live in an unpolluted place, a treetop, he decided. Wishing to live on a treetop, he performed a sacred rite during which he cut off and offered his own flesh into the sacred fire. Soon the fire deity himself appeared before him and announced, You will surely attain the wish which has already been appeared in your heart. After accepting the ascetic's worship, fire disappeared. Vasishta continued. The sage then saw in front of him a huge kadamba tree which had a majestic appearance. It seemed to wipe with its hand, its foliage, the tears of his beloved sky. It had actually covered the space between heaven and earth with 1,000 of its arms, and it stood like the cosmic form of the Lord, with the sun and the moon for his eyes. Laden with flowers, it rained them on the holy and divine sages who traversed the sky. And the bees that dwelt on it sang a song of welcome to those sages. The sage ascended this tree, which stood like a pillar linking heaven and earth. He sat on the topmost branch of the tree. For a brief moment, he let his eyes roam in all the directions. He had a vision of the cosmic being. Because he had taken his abode on the Kadamba tree, he had come to be known as Kadamba Dāśūra. He commenced his austerities sitting on the top of the tree. He had been accustomed to the ritualistic performance enjoined in the Vedas, and so he engaged himself in their performance, but this time mentally. Yet, such is the power of such mental performance, it purified the sage's mind and his heart, and he attained pure wisdom. One day he beheld in front of him a nymph clad in flowers. She was extremely beautiful. The sage asked her, O beautiful lady, with your radiance you can overpower even Cupid. Who are you? She replied, Lord, I am a deity of the forest. In this world nothing is unattainable to one who resorts to the presence of an enlightened sage like you. I have just been to attend a festival in the forest, where I met several other goddesses of the forest, each one of them with her offspring. I was the only one among them who had no children, hence I am unhappy. However, when you are in this forest, why should I be unhappy? Grant me a son, or I shall reduce myself to ashes. The sage picked up a creeper and handing it to her said, "Go. Just as this creeper will produce flowers in a month, you too will give birth to a son." The grateful goddess went away. She returned to the sage after 12 years with a son of that age. She said, "Lord, this is your son, and I have instructed him in all branches of learning. I pray that you may instruct him in self-knowledge, for who will let his son grow into a fool?" The sage accepted to do so, and the goddess went away. From that day, the sage began to instruct the young man in all branches of self-knowledge. Vasishta continued, "During this period, I was myself going over that very tree and heard the sage's instructions to his son." Dāśūra said, "I shall illustrate what I wish to say concerning this world with a story. There lives a mighty king named Kotha who is capable of conquering the three worlds. The deities presiding over the worlds faithfully honor his commands. No one can even catalogue his innumerable deeds which were productive of both happiness and unhappiness. His valor could not be challenged by anyone using any weapons whatsoever, or even by fire any more than one can hit space with a fist. Even Indra, Vishnu, and Shiva could not equal him in his enterprises. The king had three bodies which had completely engulfed the worlds, and they were respectively the best, the middling, and the least. The king arose in space and got established in space. There in space, the king built a city with 14 roads and 3 sectors. In it were pleasure gardens, beautiful mountain peaks for sports, and 7 lakes with pearls and creepers in them. In it there were 2 lights which were hot and cold, and whose light never diminished. In that city, the king created several types of beings. Some were placed above, others in the middle, and yet others below. Of them, some were long-lived and others short-lived. They were covered with black hair. They had 9 gates. They were well ventilated. They had 5 lamps, 3 pillars, and white supporting wooden poles. They were soft with clay plastering. All this was created by the Maya or illusory power of the king. Here, the king besports himself with all the ghosts and goblins that had been created to protect the mansions. When he thinks of moving, he thinks of a future city and contemplates migrating to it. Surrounded by the ghosts, he runs fast to the new abode after leaving the previous one, and occupies the new city built in the fashion of a magic creation. In that again, when he contemplates destruction, he destroys himself. Sometimes he wails, "What shall I do? I am ignorant, I am miserable." Sometimes he is happy, at others pitiable. Thus he lives and conquers, goes, talks, flourishes, shines, and does not shine. My son, thus this king is tossed in this ocean of world appearance. Dāśūra continued, "Thus has been illustrated the creation of the universe and of man, Kotha, who arrives in the great void, is none but a notion or an intention. This notion arises in the great void of its own accord and dissolves in the great void of its own accord too. The entire universe and whatever there is in it is the creation of this notion or intention, nothing else. In fact, even the Trinity, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, are the limbs of that notion. That intention alone is responsible for the creation of the 3 worlds, the 14 regions, and the 7 oceans. The city built by the king is nothing but the living entity with his different organs and their characteristics. Of the different kinds of beings thus created, some, the gods, are in a higher region, and the others are in lower realms, like the humans and the demons. Having built this imaginary city, the king placed it under the protecting care of ghosts. These ghosts are the ahamkara, ego principle. The king henceforth sports in this world, in this body. In a moment he sees the world in the waking state, and after some time he abruptly shifts his attention to the world within which he enjoys in his dreams. He moves from one city to another, from one body to another, from one realm to another. After many such peregrinations, he develops wisdom, getting disillusioned with these worlds and their pleasures, and reaches the end of his wandering by the cessation of all notions. In one moment he seems to enjoy wisdom. whilst the very next moment he is caught up in the pleasure seeking, and in an instant his understanding gets perverted, just as in the case of a little child. These notions are either like dense darkness, or pure and transparent, or impure. The dense and darkness give rise to ignorance and births in the lower orders of creation. Pure and transparent gives rise to wisdom, drawing one close to the truth. The impure ones give rise to worldliness. When all such notions cease, then there is liberation. Even if one engages oneself in every other sort of spiritual endeavor, and even one has the gods themselves as one's teachers, and even if one were in heaven or any other region, liberation is not had except through the cessation of all notions. The real, the unreal, and the admixture of these two are all but notions and nothing else. And notions themselves are either real or unreal. What then shall we call real in this universe? Hence, my son, give up these notions, thoughts, and intentions. When they cease, the mind naturally turns to what is truly beyond the mind, the infinite consciousness. The young man, his son, asked, Father, please tell me how this sankalpa, notion, thought, idea, concept arises and how it grows and ceases. Dāśūra replied, My son, when in the infinite consciousness, the consciousness becomes aware of itself as its own object, there is the seed of ideation. The consciousness becoming aware of itself as its own object is the seed of ideation. This is very subtle, but soon it becomes gross and fills the whole of space as it were. When consciousness is engrossed in this ideation, it thinks the object is distinct from the subject. Then the ideation begins to germinate and grow. Ideation multiplies naturally by itself. This leads to sorrow, not to happiness. There is no cause for sorrow in this world other than this ideation. This ideation or notion has really come into being by sheer coincidence. The crow alights on the palm tree and the fruit falls to the ground without any causal connection. But this unreal non-substance is yet able to grow. Your birth, therefore, is unreal. Your existence surely is unreal too. When you know this and realize this, the unreality ceases. Do not entertain ideas. Do not hold on to the notion of your existence. For it is only by these that the future comes into being. There is no cause for fear in the destruction of all ideation. When there is no thought, notion, or ideation, when there is no thought, notion, or ideation ceases. My son, it is easier to cease to entertain notions than it is to crush a flower that lies in the palm of your hand. The latter demands effort, the former is effortless. When thus all notions cease, there is great peace, and sorrow is destroyed to its very root. For everything in this universe is but an idea, a notion, a concept. It has different names like the mind, the living soul, or jiva, intelligence and conditioning. There are no real substances corresponding to these words. Hence, remove all thought. Do not waste your life and effort in other endeavors. Already, as the notions weaken, one is less affected by happiness and unhappiness, and knowledge of the unreality of the objects prevents attachment. The knowledge of the unreality of the objects prevents attachment. When there is no hope, there is neither elation nor depression. The mind itself is the jiva when it is reflected in consciousness. And mind itself builds castles in the air, stretching itself as it were into the past, the present, and the future. In the infinite consciousness, the consciousness became aware of itself as its own object, that is the seed of ideation. The mind itself is the jiva when it is reflected in consciousness. And mind itself builds castles in the air, stretching itself as it were into the past, the present, and the future. It is not possible to comprehend the ripples of ideation, but this much can be said: sense experiences multiply exponentially from them. The ripples of ideation is hard to comprehend, but sense experiences multiply them, and when these are given up, they cease to be. If these notions are real, like the blackness of coal, then you cannot remove them. But that is not so, hence they can be destroyed. Vasishta continued, hearing the sage's words, I descended upon that Kadamba tree. For a considerable time the three of us discussed self-knowledge, and I awakened in them the supreme knowledge. Then I took leave of them and went away. O Rama, this is meant to illustrate the nature of the world appearance, and therefore this story is as true as the world itself. Even if you believe that this world and yourself are real, then be it so. Rest firmly in your own self. If you think that this is both real and unreal, then adopt the appropriate attitude to this changing world. If you believe that the world is unreal, then be firmly established in the infinite consciousness. Similarly, whether you believe that the world has had a creator or not, let it not cloud your understanding. The self is devoid of the senses. Hence, though the doer of everything, he is as if inert. One enjoys a lifespan of just 100 years. Why does the immortal self run after the sensual pleasures during this brief period? If the world and its objects are real, even then it does not stand to reason that the conscious self should seek the inert objects. And of course, if they are not real, nothing but unhappiness can result from their pursuit. Give up the desires of your heart. You are what you are in this world. Knowing this, sport in this world. In the very presence of the self, all activities take place in this world. Just as in the very presence of a lamp there is light. The lamp has no intention to shine. Even so, the self does not intend to do anything, and yet everything happens in its very presence. You may adopt one or the other of the two attitudes. 1. I am the omnipresent being that does nothing. Or 2. I am the doer of all actions in this world. In both cases, you will arrive at the same state of perfect equanimity, which is immortality. You will be free from likes and dislikes, attraction and aversion. You will be rid of foolish feelings like someone served me or someone else hurt me. Hence, you may feel, I'm not the doer, I do not exist, or I'm the doer and I'm everything. Then who can serve you? Then who can hurt you? Or inquire into the nature of the self. Who am I? And realize I am not any of this that is attributed to me. I am not the body, I am not the mind, I am not the intellect, and so on and so forth. None of that which we used to attribute to ourself is not me. The rest established in the self, which is the highest state of consciousness, in which the best among the holy men who know of this state ever dwell. Rama asked, Holy sage, how does this unreal world exist in the absolute Brahman? Can snow exist in the sun? Vasishta said, Rama, this is not the right time for you to ask the question, for you will not be able to comprehend the answer now. Love stories are uninteresting to a little boy. Every tree bears its fruit in due season, and my instruction will also bear fruit in good time. If you seek yourself with the self by your own self-effort, then you will clearly find the answer to your question. I discussed the question of doership and non-doership in order that the nature of the mental conditioning or ideation may become evident. Bondage is bondage to these thoughts and notions. Freedom is freedom from them. Give up all notions, even those of liberation, first by the cultivation of good relationships like friendship. Give up tendencies and notions which are gross and materialistic. Later, give up even such notions as friendship, even though continuing to be friendly, etc. Give up all desires and contemplate the nature of cosmic consciousness. Even this is within the realm of ideation or thought. Hence, give this up in due course. Rest in what remains after all these have been given up, and renounce the renouncer of these notions. When even the notion of the ego sense has ceased, you will be like the infinite space. He who has thus renounced everything from his heart, he indeed is the Supreme Lord. Whether he continues to live an active life or whether he rests in contemplation all the time, to him neither action nor inaction is of any use. O Rama, I have examined all the scriptural and investigated the truth. There is no salvation without the total renunciation of all notions or ideas or mental conditioning. This world of diverse names and forms is composed of the desirable and the undesirable. For these people strive, but for self-knowledge no one strives. Rare are the sages of self-knowledge in the three worlds. One may be an emperor of the world or the king of heaven, but all these are only composed of the material elements. It is a pity that people indulge in such colossal destruction of life for these petty gains. Shame on them. None of these engages the attention of the sage, because he is equipped with the self-knowledge. He is established in that supreme seat to which the sun and the moon have no access. Hence, the sage of self-knowledge is not enamored of the gains or the pleasures of the entire universe. The end of the story of Dāśūra. A little commentary here from a Patanjali's yoga reference. The reference to he is established in the supreme seat to which the sun and the moon have no access may be a hint towards the Sushumna Nadi. The Ida Nadi is called the Surya Nadi or the Sun Nadi, and it's supposed to be generating heat in the body. And the Pingala Nadi, which is the right Nadi, is supposed to indicate the Moon Nadi, and it's supposed to cool Shitala of the body. And these two Nadis, as per the Yoga Sutras, intertwine with each other like a snake from the base of the spine in a place called Muladhara all the way till Sahasrara. And there is a central Nadi that goes through, it's called the Sushumna Nadi. In most of the Kriya Yoga practices, the acolyte is taught how to control the prana through the pranayama methods so that he can activate the Ida and Pingala Nadi at will and then make the prana skip both of them and go through the Sushumna Nadi. When the seeker can control the prana through the Sushumna Nadi, he raises his level of consciousness higher and higher until it reaches the Sahasrara chakra, which is the crown chakra. So there's a commentary by there's a comment by Swami Venkateshananda towards the end of the chapter, which is the end of the story, that puts in parenthesis whether the line that he is established in the supreme seat to which the sun and the moon have no access may be a reference to the Sushumna Nadi. Now is the end of the story of Dāśūra along with the commentary.